Hello everyone, it's Tom in Los Angeles. I hope you're doing well. I'm recording this on Saturday, the 17th of April, 2021. And today I'm going to comment and talk about canto number 30 of Dante's Inferno. I can't believe we're already at canto 30 and almost done with the first cantica of the Divine Comedy. This 30th canto tends to go almost unnoticed, and that's what happened to me the first time I read it, and probably the second time as well, because yes, it does have striking images, especially the man shaped like a lute or like a musical instrument, but at least a couple of times I read it without understanding something that is moving as a deeper layer, and that's what, once I understood that, that's what really excites me about this canto, and I still find it the most interesting portion. I believe Dante saw the power of the myth of Narcissus as a myth that is psychologically more intense and more powerful than others, and I would agree with that, because this reflection of yourself, of your identity, arguably probably even in today's world, with all of these videos and self-reflection of ourselves, is something that touches us very closely and very personally. And it has a lot of psychological echoes and reflections. So in my mind, the 30th canto is the canto of Narcissus. I've been struck when I learned that in each canto 30th of his work of the Divine Comedy, Dante has managed to insert the myth of Narcissus as a code. We know that in the huge architecture of the Divine Comedy, Dante is almost operating like a coder, like a software developer. What strikes me is that if you look at the Divine Comedy as a cathedral, as this huge building, there are these cross-references that cut vertically through the canticles, canto 30th and 30th, for example, with Narcissus, which is almost like walking into a cathedral and being able to notice a particular element of the architecture only if you are in a certain position, and if your eyes and your sight aligns with a particular series of elements in the architecture. I find this incredibly fascinating, but let's see what Canto 30th is about. We're still in the 10th bulge, so we have seen in the previous canto how the alchemists or forgers of metals are punished by getting this leprosy or something similar to leprosy. And then in this canto, we learn that still under the forgers type of umbrella definition, we have three more types of punishment and condemned souls. We have as a second type, the impersonators, who are punished with hydrophobia, almost getting to the level of dogs. Then we have the forgers of coins, who are punished with a dropsy, and we'll see that. And then finally we have the perjurers, who are punished with a sort of constant ravaging fever. The initial 6 terzine of the canto are all taken from Ovid, Metamorphoses. We're always going back there, to the point that I personally have never read the Metamorphoses in their entirety. It's a long work. But I believe if you want to really get deep into the Divine Comedy, you should read it all before as a preparation. In particular, in this introduction of canto, it's interesting how Dante is in a couple of terzine almost literally taking the examples from the the poem by Ovid. So the first myth that Dante opens with is the one of Juno, made crazy with jealousy by Jupiter. And I love how Mark Musa, in his version, in his translation, follows each canto with really clear and almost, I would say, simplified summaries of this myth. So let me read his explanation of this myth here. He says, Jupiter's predilection for mortal women always enraged Juno, his wife. In this case, her anger was provoked by her husband's dalliance with Semele, the daughter of Cadmus, king of Thebes, who bore him Bacchus. At this point, Juno vowed to destroy not only Semele, but her entire family. And Semele's sister was Ino. Ino was married with this Athamas, who was a king. And Athamas is really the main character that Dante uses for his simile, because in her jealousy, Juno made Athamas so mad and crazy that when he saw his wife and his two children, he mistook them for a lioness and her cubs. At this point, he killed one, and then Ino, crazy with desperation, committed suicide with the other child. So this is a perfect example of raging madness, this Athamas. The second example of raging madness is Hecuba. Hecuba, I think actually Musa explains that very well as well. He says, having triumphed over the Trojans, the Greeks returned to their homeland, bearing with them as a slave Hecuba, the wife of Priam, king of Troy. She was also to make some tragic discoveries. She saw Polyxena, her daughter, slain on the grave of Achilles. And also she discovered her son Polydorus dead and unburied on the coast, just ashore. So that's exactly what Dante says. He says, Hecuba, wretched a captive after they killed Polyxena, with her there witnessing. And her sorrow drove her mad. Her soul so wrung, she began barking like a dog, which is a reference to the punishment for these particular souls, which is hydrophobia. Something that I find pretty striking here in the Italian version, that maybe is actually lost in the English, is in the fourth terzina, where Dante says, she drowned herself and the other child she held, and when fortune brought down the Trojans, this concept of fortune bringing down the Trojans, in the Italian version, he says, e quando la fortuna volse in basso l'altezza dei Troiani. This fortuna volse in basso is not only bringing down, but it refers to the image of a wheel that turns towards the lower part, and therefore the reference to the wheel of fortune, which is a very ancient image, despite being a TV show as well. So we move forward to the point of these two similes of raging madness, Athamas and Hecuba, to Dante's point, which is no fury of Thebes or Troy was ever seen so cruel, not any rending of beasts and not tearing of human limbs, as I saw shown by two pale naked shades who now ran up biting. We are to understand that these two shades have hydrophobia, and they are behaving like animals, like pigs, the way a pig does loosed from the pen. So not only like pigs, but with this type of vertical rocking movement. They're on their fours and they're jumping with this rocking movement like a just liberated pig or hog. Very beastly. So they're running on all fours, and Dante is there with Capocchio and the other guy from Arezzo from the previous canto. One of these two souls bites Capocchio on the nape and sank his tusks in deep. And so Capocchio is being dragged away. The other person from Arezzo, the other condemned souls, who, if we remember from the previous canto, is Grifolino, he told me that monstrousness is Gianni Schicchi. He runs rabid among the others here and graces them like this. He keeps running around like a hydrophobic dog and bites condemned souls. Some people will remember this name Gianni's Schicchi because it's actually a famous opera by Puccini. Maybe you're familiar with a particular canto or part of this opera, which is titled O mio babbino caro. I would suggest you try and maybe find it online because it's really beautiful. Puccini, the person who helped Puccini compose and who wrote this the booklet for Gianni's Schicchi was inspired by Dante, by this particular scene. Now, Gianni's Schicchi was a historic character. He lived in Florence before, not before Dante, but when Dante was a boy. So he probably died around 1280 or 1282. And he was famous, he was renowned for his impersonating abilities. The story of Gianni Schicchi is really interesting, and it's so, let's say, striking and particular that it's not surprising that it inspired an opera, or which is a little bit of a comedy, because it's got a humoristic background. And in two words, the story goes, which is credible, is plausible. The story goes that Gianni Schicchi, who was part of the Cavalcanti family, was called by somebody to impersonate their dead father on his deathbed, who was already dead, and because their son hadn't had the time to ask the father to write the type of will that they wanted, or maybe the father didn't even want to write a type of will. So Gianni Schicchi, with his voice impersonating ability and maybe makeup, etc., sits or lays in the deathbed of this already dead person, pretending to be him, and dictates a will that is completely fake. By the way, like Dante says here, when trying to acquire the finest lady of the herd, which refers to a cow, a very precious cow, part of the herd that was property of this dead person. It's a little confusing, the fact that in English it says, Pinsky says lady of the herd, because it makes you think about a woman, a lady. But to be fair, Dante also says per guadagnare la donna della torma, which is woman. I think I noticed that Musa here uses the expression the queen of studs. That maybe makes you think a little bit more about what actually is meant. In any case, Puccini's opera comes from here, and that's a little piece of interesting information. He's also, this condemned soul that is talking to Dante, is also informing him that that one is the ancient soul of Myrrha. She was the daughter of Cinyras, king of Cyprus, and there is a myth about her falling in love with her father and impersonating another woman in order to make love with her father, trick her father into having incestuous love with her. And but here Myrrha is not punished for incest, she's punished for the impersonation. And I know that just like we've been discussing in comments as well before, there would be a lot to discuss about and argue about why is this type of impersonation such a horrible sin to be punished so close to Lucifer, so deep in hell. But let's move on this point. As soon as the raging pair disappears, Dante turns and he sees somebody else. He sees one who would be shaped exactly like a lute, had he been cut off at the groin from where a man is forked. This is a guy with, he has dropsy, which we don't know exactly what Dante meant, but this type of illness that causes hydric retention, and therefore somebody is almost paralyzed because his body is filled with water. And he looks like a lute. This person is the central character of the canto, and he is Master Adam, who was called Adam the Anglia in Dante's times, and he was a famous coin forger. He was actually paid, or let's say convinced, by the Guidi family to forge fiorini, the Florence coin, for them. And he was called Adam the Anglia because apparently he was English. And around, again, 1280 or around those times, when Dante was young, he was burned at the stake because he was found guilty of this crime. And there is a very interesting, there are two interesting notes here to make. One, the fact that this Guidi family, for whom Master Adam was forging coins, is the same family where Dante was a guest. He stayed with them for some time during his exile. And so the Guidi were actually leaders of the white Guelphs who were exiled and kicked out from Florence. So reading this canto, you are led to think, why is Dante portraying them in such a bad light? Because they are just criminals, just like Master Adam. And somebody has commented that it's possible that in doing this, Dante was writing with the goal to almost ingratiate himself to the black Guelphs in Florence, to get on their good side by showing them that he was criticizing the white Guelphs in his poem, in his work. It's possible, we don't know for sure. The second really interesting element of this portion, in my opinion, is the language. With the way Dante plays with Italian in Master Adam's explanation has to do a lot with the sound of running water, and the fact that the contrast with the fact that Master Adam is dying of thirst. He's so thirsty. This is why Dante uses so many L's, letter L's, in the Italian of what Master Adam is saying. The sound of this is assai di quel ch'io volli, e ora lasso un gocciol d'acqua bramo, li ruscelletti che verdi colli del Casentin, etc., etc., freddi e molli. There is a musicality here. It's also in part to render a certain music in itself, because we know that Master Adam is being compared to a lute, to an actual musical instrument. So Dante is playing with this for sure, and it's really fascinating. Where Dante was a guest of this Guidi family, as I mentioned, is the castle in Romena. And this Romena is a location that can still be visited today. It's very beautiful. A big part of the castle is still intact, and you can visit it. Dante refers to it on verse 70. He says, there is Romena, where I falsely coined the currency that bears the Baptist face, because John the Baptist was Florence's patron, and so the florin. And there's always a typical attitude of Dante's condemned souls to blame others for their own sins. This is exactly what Master Adam is doing here. He's saying the miserable soul of Guido, who was one of this Guidi family, or Alessandro, his brother, or set my eyes on who is their brother, is the third. Two of these brothers were already dead when Dante wrote the Divine Comedy. The third one, this guy who is their brother, was apparently still alive, which is an exception to all the existing people that Dante talks about, the fact that he's still alive. And Dante refers to this Fonte Branda. I would not trade a site for Fonte Branda, because Master Adam wants them to go to hell, which is maybe a spring in Romena, in the same location where there was a natural spring. or somebody says it could be a fountain in Siena as well. But it's pretty clear here on verse 88 that Master Adam is blaming them. It's literally saying, it's because of them that I am in this kind of family. They persuaded me to make these florins, etc., etc. It's a circle, just like Francesca in Canto 5. It's not their fault. These condemned souls had lost the good of intellect, so they have lost the ability to understand what their actions, their own responsibility was. They don't understand the concept of free will, and they keep blaming somebody else for what they've done. At this point, after verse 95-96, Dante is asking Master Adam who are other people who are sitting next to him. And here we get to the fourth type of forgers in this Bolgia, who are the perjurers. The two examples that that Master Adam mentions and that Dante sees are, one is Potiphar's wife, who comes from Genesis, biblical woman who accused Joseph in front of the Pharaoh of something that he didn't do, so perjury that way. And the other one is Sinon, who was a character in the Aeneid of Virgil, Trojan Greek, and this Sinon, both of them are suffering from a raging fever, and they cannot move because they're suffering of the... It's again, I would wonder, why is their sin so terrible that they are there? And honestly, I don't have the right answer for this. I would need to go into Dante's brain to understand why he put them so low in hell. But what's really interesting is that with this Sinon, the Trojan Greek, who is there, by the way, because his fault was to allow to concoct the fraud by which the Trojan horse was entered into Troy. Here starts a back and forth dialogue between Master Adam and Sinon, which is very famous because it's a game. Dante is presenting to us an example of the so-called tenzone. Tenzone was a type of poetry that existed in Dante's times and before as well, that funnily enough resulted in an exchange of literary insults between two poets. And the game, because it was a game, was to try and in your reply to the insult received by the other poet, was to try and mirror at least the last line of the other poets, or something that the poet had said in their own poem. And this is precisely what Dante does here. Let's remember that he's presenting us everything in the Divine Comedy, so he had to present this tenzone, even if it's a very lowly and vulgar type of poetry. He knows that. In fact, this is why Virgil will scold him at the end. I find this really funny. The actual content of what Master Adam and Sinon tell each other is not too important, but I would love actually to highlight this beautiful mirroring of each other's back and forth that Dante does here, and that, I'm going to be completely honest, I had no idea it existed before I read some useful commentaries. So we're looking at verse 112, where in the English version, Master Adam is saying, "Here you speak truth." The dropsy one replied, "However, at Troy, when truth was their demand," etc., etc. The Italian version is, "Tu di ver di questo, ma tu non fosti sì ver testimonio, la ve del ver fosti a Troia richiesto." You notice how this word ver comes back three times, back two times, and is repeated three times. So the meaning of the term changes in every line. It's used in different meanings. But what Dante does in the reply by Sinon is echo this by saying, "Se io dissi falso e tu falsasti," tu, il conio, disse Sinon, "e son qui per un fallo," which is another way to say falso. So 3 falso against the 3 ver. Ver means true, falso means false. It's a perfect mirror. And it would be extremely beautiful in itself if this was it, if this was all that the game that is doing. But there is an even deeper layer, which is Dante is here making us think or reflect upon Narcissus, which is this myth that he's going to mention towards the end of the canto. And in my opinion, is the most profound and most important point that he wants to drive in Canto 30th, Narcissus. The fact that given the myth of Narcissus, we all know he was this guy who was so handsome. He wasn't able to detach himself from, as soon as he saw his image reflected in a lake. And then, depending on the version, but in most cases, he dies there and he becomes a flower, or he committed suicide. So we have here Master Adam, who is described as, by the other Sinon, as licking the mirror of Narcissus. And you would lick Narcissus' looking glass without delaying for too many a word of invitation, if you only could. The myth of Narcissus is presented here for the first time in Inferno, and Dante presents it in his pagan version, falling in love with your own image, and which brings a very bad consequence for your soul. In Purgatorio, Canto number 30th, Dante will again come back to this myth, but refer to himself. If you look at Purgatorio verse 76 and 77, we're going to talk about it when we do Purgatorio, but he's talking about himself, and he's turning the classical myth into a positive, because as soon as Dante sees his own image reflected in this river in Purgatory, he detaches his sight, he looks away with shame. In a way, he resolves the problem that Narcissus was not able to solve for himself. And this has a spiritual meaning. It means that through Christianity, once again, we are getting out of the mistakes of the pagan world. We're going to see a reference to Narcissus once again in Paradiso, number 30th again. And we're going to have time to discuss that as well. But you see how incredible this type of architecture is. I really think it's incredible. At this point, Canto 30th goes towards the end. We need to remember that Dante's journey is an educational journey, it's an initiation journey. And therefore, Virgil scolds him because he's been a bystander looking at this tenzone with the curiosity of a bystander, almost like somebody in our world who would look at a car accident. And so Virgil gets really angry at him. So, what are you doing? You're wasting your time. Let's go, let's move forward. You're not doing anything useful here. You are still in this educational process. And do not forget, it's a beautiful closing of the canto. Do not forget that I'm always at your side. Should fortune bring you again to where you hear people who are arguing as those two did, wanting to hear them is a low desire. Another point that Virgil brings to Dante here is that despite his sense of shame and fault for what he did, because Dante realizes that, Virgil tells him a greater fault would be cleansed by lesser shame than yours a moment ago. So it's beautiful how Virgil keeps behaving like a mature father, somebody who is really caring and cares about educating his son, who is Dante. That's all we have for Canto 30th. Again, very, very interesting, with so many different layers to look into. And thank you very much. Thank you for watching. I hope you're going to have a great weekend and a great week ahead. Thanks again.